Clint Eastwood is perhaps the most iconic badass in the history of cinema, thanks to his numerous roles playing the stoic, steely-eyed gunslinger in countless classic westerns. So let's take a look back across his career in the genre to find his coolest scene from every western that he ever starred in. So first up, we have the classic western TV show Rawhide, in which Eastwood played a hot-headed cattle driver called Rowdy Yates. And one of his coolest moments in the show came in its final season, when Rowdy stumbles upon an altercation between a young cowboy and a trigger-happy foreman, played by the legendary Charles Bronson, who takes great pleasure in toying with his unarmed opponent before pressuring him into a shootout.
Take it up.
So in this moment, Rowdy steps in between the pair and says,
"What's going on here?"
I'm teaching a wet behind-the-ears kid a lesson in manners.
That's enough.
Nope. He still has it coming.
Only you're doing all the shooting.
Well, he's got a gun now. All he has to do is pick it up.
So using his muddied pants as a pretense for the duel, it's clear that the foreman isn't backing down, giving Rowdy no choice but to out-intimidate the bully.
Putting a high price on a pair of pants, aren't you?
Maybe you'd like to pay for them.
Anytime, mister.
Rowdy then ends any possibility of a gunfight and sends the foreman packing, proving early on that Eastwood had what it took to hold his own on screen against some of the toughest actors that the western genre had to offer. Next up, we have A Fistful of Dollars, a spaghetti western that offered Clint Eastwood his breakout role as a mysterious poncho-wearing gunslinger of very few words. But interestingly, when we're first introduced to the character, he seems fairly meek and somewhat of a pushover, making no effort to fight back when he gets taunted and teased by a gang of locals.
Hello?
Saludos.
And it's only when he sees an opportunity to make some money that he heads back to confront the trio of bullies from before.
Get 3 coffins ready.
So at this point, both the henchmen and the audience are skeptical as to how a lone gunslinger stands any chance against 3 armed men, especially after he bizarrely requests an apology on behalf of his mule.
You see, I understand you men were just playing around, but the mule, he just doesn't get it. Of course, if you were to all apologize...
And then, all of a sudden, Eastwood hits us with his very first trademark scowl and says,
I don't think it's nice you laughing. You see, my mule don't like people laughing. It's the crazy idea you're laughing at him.
And just like that, a legend was born, as the man with no name dispatches the gunman with ease, before Eastwood casually strolls away, having single-handedly changed cinema forever. So just a year later, Clint Eastwood returned for a sequel called For a Few Dollars More, where he reprised his role as a nameless drifter, this time working as a bounty hunter. And this leads him to a busy saloon where he introduces himself to his target by winning a hand of poker.
Didn't hear what the bet was.
Your life.
Now, although the wanted man puts up a fight, he's easily dispatched and clearly beaten, until 3 of his friends show up to help.
Alive or dead, it's your choice.
Let Red go.
So once again, the nameless gunslinger finds himself outnumbered 3-1. But this time, we as the audience know that this isn't quite the advantage that his opponents think it is. And in a flash, they're dead, along with the wanted man for good measure, showing the world for a second time just how much of a badass Eastwood could be. So after the success of his first 2 spaghetti westerns, Clint Eastwood returned for a 3rd and final film called The Good, the Bad and the Ugly, which proved to be the role that really rocketed him to stardom. So the movie is full of badass moments from Eastwood, but perhaps none are quite as memorable as the part that he played in the iconic final duel, between him and his 2 rivals, who have both proved themselves to be capable adversaries in their shared pursuit of a buried fortune. So having written the details of its location on a stone, Blondie initiates an unforgettable 3-way showdown, in which he doesn't show a hint of fear, even as the tension builds to unimaginable levels. And then finally he draws, effortlessly killing one of his deadliest foes, before adjusting his cigar and showing that he's not just the quickest gun in the West, but also the smartest, as Tuco suddenly realizes that Blondie didn't even give him a loaded gun, to which Eastwood smugly says,
You see, in this world, there's 2 kinds of people, my friend. Those with loaded guns, and those who dig. You dig.
So just a couple of years later, Clint Eastwood starred in his first American Western called Hang 'em High, in which he played Jed Cooper, a deputy US Marshal who seeks revenge on a posse who attempted to kill him for a crime that he didn't commit. And this leads to a standout scene in which Jed comes upon one of his attackers drinking alone in a saloon, who he promptly arrests on sight. But when the drinker refuses to take him seriously, Jed gives him a reminder of his crimes and says,
When you hang a man, you better look at him.
Now terrified, an unhinged Jed stares the man down and says,
Don't go for that gun, Reno. I need you alive.
But of course his opponent doesn't listen, and Jed guns down the criminal with ease, as Eastwood delivers a gloriously hammy performance in a role that showed he could be a badass even as a white hat. So 2 years later, Clint Eastwood starred in another Western called 2 Mules for Sister Sara, which although not a spaghetti Western, clearly wanted to tap into their success, with Eastwood playing a character that was more than a little familiar to the man with no name. And perhaps no scene demonstrates this more than the first, when Eastwood's Hogan stumbles upon a nun being harassed by 3 drunken men, prompting him to fire a warning shot and say,
Party's over. You men can get moving.
However, when the attackers fail to take him seriously, Hogan doesn't think twice about gunning 2 of them down, and casually tossing a stick of dynamite over his shoulder to kill the 3rd, before looking up at the confused nun to say,
You keep standing around like that, someone's gonna burn the hell out of you.
The next Western that Clint Eastwood starred in was Joe Kidd, in which he plays a former bounty hunter that is reluctantly hired by a ruthless landowner to kill a Mexican revolutionary. And not long after joining the posse, Joe encounters one of the armed men that he'll be working with, who says,
You know how many holes I can put in you with this gun?
Looking totally unfazed, Joe replies,
I got a dollar says I can break your neck before you get that rig moved a half-inch.
In response, the gunman explains that the only reason he isn't killing Joe is because his boss wants him around. So while lighting a cigar, Eastwood delivers a comeback that only he could ever be cool enough to pull off convincingly.
When Mr. Harm doesn't want me around anymore, you let me know, huh, boy?
So the following year, Clint Eastwood decided it was finally time to try his hand at directing a Western, called High Plains Drifter, in which he plays a nameless rider who helps a cowardly town enact revenge on those responsible for the brutal murder of their marshal. And once again, Eastwood delivers an effortlessly cool performance, as a no-nonsense, stoic gunslinger that can strike fear into anyone with just a few words. For instance, during a scene in which the drifter is watching the townspeople practice shooting, a non-approving local steps up behind him with a knife, prompting Eastwood to say,
No, you're gonna look awfully silly with that knife sticking up your ass.
Now, even though his would-be assassin still has the upper hand, the ice-cold remark totally puts him off, as the drifter proceeds to take a sip of his beer and show off his shooting skills. And without ever having turned around, Eastwood comically says,
You still here?
No. No, I was just going.
So a few years later, Clint Eastwood starred in the Civil War Western The Outlaw Josie Wales, playing a farmer who joins the Confederate Army and becomes an infamous outlaw, in order to take revenge against those who killed his family. And later on in the movie, when a bounty hunter comes looking for him in a saloon, Eastwood delivers one of the coldest comebacks of his entire career.
You're wanted, Wales.
You a bounty hunter?
Man's got to do something for a living these days.
Dying ain't much of a living, boy.
And although the bounty hunter initially comes to his senses and leaves Josie alone, in the end he just can't help himself.
I had to come back.
I know.
Following this, Eastwood didn't star in another Western for nearly 10 years, until Pale Rider, a movie that he directed himself and starred in as a mysterious avenger, who comes to the aid of a helpless community being driven out by a greedy mining company. So as a director, Eastwood knew that at the start of the movie he was not only going to have to introduce a whole new character, but also re-establish himself as a credible Western star, proving that he could still be a badass even in his 50s. And the way he went about this was masterful, because shortly after a group of henchmen start bullying a local, one one of them spots a mysterious rider in the distance, quietly watching on, before suddenly disappearing. So as the bullies begin beating their helpless victim, Eastwood officially makes his return to the genre, saying,
"Shouldn't play with matches."
He then effortlessly dispatches the thugs without even breaking a sweat, and of course works in a trademark quip.
Nothing like a nice piece of hickory.
So after the success of Pale Rider, Clint Eastwood decided that he would once again direct and star in a new western called Unforgiven, a film that proved to be an Oscar-winning masterpiece that perfectly capped off his career in the genre. And in the film, he plays William Money, a former bandit who takes up arms for one last job, putting him at odds with a sadistic sheriff played to perfection by Gene Hackman. And at the end of the film, this culminates in a long-awaited showdown between the pair that really doesn't disappoint. Because as Money steps out of a raging storm into the saloon with a shotgun in hand, Eastwood almost seems like a mythical figure, a living concoction of all of his previous roles, that suddenly makes Hackman's terrifying villain seem like no match for Money, despite having him massively outgunned, prompting the sheriff to say,
"Be William Money out of Missouri. Kill women and children."
That's right. I've killed women and children. Killed just about everything that walks or crawled at one time or another. And I'm here to kill you, Little Bill.
Following this, Money kills 5 men single-handedly, takes a drink, and then sees to finishing off the sheriff, sharing an exchange that fittingly feels like it could have been spoken by any of the Western characters that Eastwood had played up to that point.
I'll see you in hell, William Money.
So although most people would consider Unforgiven Clint Eastwood's final western, he did actually direct and star in a more recent neo-western called Cry Macho, in which he plays an old rodeo star who travels to Mexico City to reunite a teenage boy with his father, teaching him how to be a good man along the way. And although the movie is largely a light-hearted drama, Eastwood couldn't help but add a scene that referenced his formidable reputation in the Western genre. Because when his young companion is being manhandled, his character storms outside and stares down the attacker, before punching him straight in the face, showing that he still has what it takes to be a badass on the big screen, even at the impressive age of 91. Now let me know below, what do you personally think was Clint Eastwood's coolest Western role? And were there any classic moments of his that you think I missed? Also, if you enjoyed this video, it would help me a lot if you could leave it a like, and you might also want to check out this video right here.